Good evening, thanks for coming. This is a bit of an intimate gathering, and I think we're expecting some more people to wander in. But why don't we get started? So backed by popular demand, Drs. Claude Deschamps and Howard Shapiro, both from UVM MC and the network, the UVM Health Network. So we had decided after our last meeting that we would bring these two gentlemen back on a quarterly basis to give us an update of some of the clinical integration work group work that's been going on. And as you recall, there have been 5 work groups that have been formed: the academic work group, finance, governance, patient care and access, and hiring and retention. So once again, this is their quarterly update. We're going to bring them back in March, hopefully. And in between, what the members who are populating these work groups have, from CVMC have decided, we want to keep the medical staff informed about the progress of the work groups. So in January and in February, we've got 2 dates. I don't have those dates memorized, but they're towards the end of the month, and we'll get those dates out to you, where we'll have a similar dinner meeting, just like this, informal. But this time, the work group members that are from CVMC will actually present an update in their own particular work group, and there'll be time for questions and so on. So without further ado, I want to give you guys plenty of time and plenty of time for questions.
You were doing pretty well. You were just
No, we're done.
finished.
I'm done.
So thank you for your willingness to listen to us. We're going to be relatively brief because I think to the extent that you want to ask us questions, that's why we're here. So let's just try to catch up real quickly. So in terms of the overall progress, we're pretty well into the holiday season. So most of the work groups have met either 4 or 5 times. We were supposed to, so the slides don't reflect the snowstorm of last week. So we were supposed to have this great big meeting on last Wednesday when the snow decided to interfere with that activity, and we decided that we really didn't want people traveling. Even the roads in Burlington were treacherous. So we canceled that meeting, rescheduled for January. We've had amazing cooperation by you guys and by the folks at CVPH, and your willingness to actually travel to Burlington to attend meetings in person, and if you can't be there, to get on the phone. So we've had great attendance at the meeting. And as you might imagine, all the things that came out in our listening tour have come out in the work groups. So issues about finances and compensation and local control and standard contracts. But the engagement by the folks in the work groups and the openness of the discussions have been great. We'll talk a little bit more about this patient voice work group in a minute. We have a slide on that. All teams are currently on track, being tracked by our project manager, and we've been receiving some outside guidance in governance and finance, and actually patient care and access is in the process of trying to figure out who they're going to use to help them. So this might give you some sense of the meetings. There's actually, Claude and I were last Friday morning at CVPH talking to their medical executive committee, and today we sent out another and many of them came back, and we're trying to figure out what went on in our system. But hopefully many of you got an email from Claude and I updating all the progress of the work groups.
So,
Oh,
you know, we might have told you that, but we came here several times, and every time it's a warm reception, several people, food. And so we started hearing vibes in Burlington that, you know, you guys are going to CVPH, going here, you know, even went to Copley and other places to talk and listen Berlin, to a porter, and nobody's talking to us, like, you know, it's like we told nobody, we were not talking to people in Burlington, which was not correct, but there was a sense of neglect from some people. So we said, okay, we have to get in shape and shape up a little bit, get our game up and inform people in Burlington more in a different way, you know, because we thought that the chair were informing their people, that the email were working, and more things that we were trying to do. So we call a meeting, 6:30 in the morning. That day, there's 5 people in the room. 5 people, of which 3 were chairs. So tells you, you know, we said it's not gonna, we're gonna continue that effort, but it's not that encouraging, and you know, and then they will all tell us they did not get the memo and da 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 da. The second meeting, there must have been something. There were 26 people, and it was more engaging, and there were more questions, and every time actually there's new question, and similar to what we hear here in CVPH, but also different type of question. Last time there was issue about psychiatry. The third meeting, same thing, 26 people engaged, and they were asking us, what did you promise people in CVMC? People are asking us, what are you promising those people? There's a guy that exactly said that. Another gal said, did you think about diversity? What are you doing for diversity? And I was ashamed to say, we did not think of it that hard. Being a white male, I understood the sensitivity, or did not, and we will look into it. And there were more questions that people are. So we did not sense the huge resistance that we can see sometime in some area, but there's more a sense that people are listening and saying, okay, there's a train that is leaving the station. We'd like to know what's going on. So those 3 meetings, we can see progress, or at least more engagement and more curiosity, and so that's what we are for those sessions. So this is about patience in a big part. You're all about patience in a big part. You want those patients to be treated well, and there was nowhere direct connection with the patient. We're physician, or physician assistant, or nurse practitioner, or other, you know, we all take care of patients. And sometimes we claim we know, even the CEO, what the patients want.
Excuse me?
No, because I forget to mention, we all think that we know what our patients want, but we did not have any patients in the work group. And when we talked about it at the beginning, there was quite a bit of resistance, and so we found a way to connect with the patient, and we will have a process where we will hear from the patient. We ask Judy actually to help us connect with physician here and find a way to hear the concern that our patient have about this process and convey the process to the patients and see what they think about it. What is their suggestion? We'll do this in all 3 major sites. And there will be, you know, people working from the 3 sites. There will be a list of patients created, and we'll try thoughtfully to connect with the patient, hear what their concerns are, and test some of the issues that are being discussed. So, and I welcome your comments on this when we talk about, in our question and answer. The academic work group has made quite a bit of progress. It went for the first 2 meetings from being a group that really, we're teaching, we're not gonna teach. We thought you were gonna teach, no, we're not gonna teach. There was 2 meetings like this. It was not exactly black and white like this, but there was that big wedge in the middle. And then people saw that there was a way to get to the next step. They divided in 3 groups: research, pre-graduate education, so medical student, postgraduate, graduate medical education, the residency. And those 3 groups now have made significant progress, and they are advancing quickly, actually, toward how we're gonna codify this, and they're making great progress. And I wrote there, the degree on the assumption on all 3 groups, the degree of type of academic appointment that occurs within each organization by each physician to be determined. The team is divided, I said that, in 3 areas: research and clinical trials, graduate medical education, undergraduate, and they are identifying the value for the following. You can see that the value for each organization, the providers, the student, the organization, the network, the community, and the patient. The finance work group is probably the group that is advancing the quickest, maybe. They review the comp plan from all 3 sites. They're looking at benchmark, guiding principle defined by the group, and looking at the variable in CVPH and CVMC data for their plan development. The major discussion and concern are revolving around academic and community physicians being compensated differently. The fact that declining compensation might result in attrition, that this plan needs to be engendering trust and alignment, that consistency and standardization is necessary, but how much of it? In what's in scope, but in some different opinion about this. And we need to be sensitive to the treatment of outliers. How can we avoid a culture of onesies and twosies, which we kind of have now in several areas and situations, and still bring flexibility?
So the recruitment and retention folks are still working on a standardized contract and an offer letter. As you might remember, maybe even the last time we were here, all 3 contracts from the 3 different institutions have been reviewed by actually a lawyer who the hospital in Plattsburgh uses, Jackie Kelleher. She came up with a 60 some odd slide PowerPoint presentation on the differences between the 3 contracts. And she is working towards making a standardized contract with those principles, a clear, fair, concise, and understandable one. And then as needed, modifications, probably not in the main document of the contract, but appended to the contract for issues of salary and where you work, et cetera. And then there are differences between New York law and Vermont law that will need to be recognized in the contract. The governance work group has been working with a consultant from a company called ECG, a guy named Chris Collins, and we were we were really smart and really did our due diligence finding Chris, or we lucked into him. The reality is we lucked into him. So Chris Collins is has worked with a lot of hospitals, large tertiary care hospitals, acquiring community hospitals, as well as just finishing redoing the relationship between partners and their community division, Peachy, and redesigning how they relate to each other. And he's done some work in Pennsylvania, some work down at Hopkins quite recently. And he was up 2 weeks ago and presented to the work group 4 potential models of how we might relate to one another in a governance structure. The group rejected 2 of the models, so they were labeled A, B, C, and D. They rejected C and D, and are going to concentrate their next meeting on the pros and cons of the A model and the B model. And I'll get into it a little bit in question and answers, but I want to respect also the discussion that's going on inside the committee, so not really trying to trying to draw out for you what exactly those models are, but just know that they're having intense discussions on what governance should look like. And again, I'll answer your questions, but I do want to be somewhat respectful to that conversation. And my guess is that they won't end up, well, I don't know this, but you know, A and B could be also modified into something A plus or B star or whatever. So that's where they are. They're moving quite well, but they do want to have this conversation amongst themselves without the consultant in the room. And you can see, as you might imagine, the areas of concern. Patient care and access, and this is one that they spent a great deal of time, and I think you would all be quite proud of the aspirational document they came up with in terms of what is our promise to our patients. And that would be a perfect document in reality to test with the voice, with this patient committee, to see if it rings true, if it seems like they're on the right track. So they come up with that model of what our patient care model will be, and now they're in discussions with 3 different consultants to see who will begin the work of looking at our network, trying to understand how you would rationally begin to principally say what should each community have for services, basic services, then layer on top of that secondary services, and then discussion of where any kind of tertiary and or quaternary services should be in our region. And then we'll be able to, once we have that plan, which will be obviously an interesting piece of work, then we know today where our workforce is, and then we have to see where our workforce is appropriately distributed and how we might get to the plan. So that's, and I think everybody recognizes that because of the contentious nature of that, just that very discussion, that having somebody who does this work on the outside to bring them in so it can be fairly done, unbiasedly done, so it's not the planning people in Burlington doing this work, is probably worth the spend. So that's what's happening with those guys. And then we'll just finish up by telling you that, first of all, we're on track. We've got a lot of work to do, but we're on track. We have an internal timeline to get this work done by June. The promise is to get it through the UVM-HN board sometime in early fall, so sometime in late summer.
He's a little bit concerned about his fishing schedule.
Yeah, I am very concerned about my fishing schedule. So that's why I don't want anything after June. But that being said, that's our promise. So a lot of work between now and then, but that's what we're committed to doing. So that's the last slide. Trying to keep it short.
Can you elaborate on the non-compete concept?
Sure. So just so everybody should take a deep breath and understand that if you're an established practice, I gave you a contract that had a non-compete in it, it's not enforced.
But just when you, is there a non-compete part of the current contracts?
In Burlington there is.
Or is there?
Yeah.
So would it be, I'm just thinking globally, would it be like, since it would be one big medical group for the whole region, essentially, if you signed a contract, you couldn't go from here to Burlington?
That's funny, because I tried to attend all the meetings, and I happened to be there when this was discussed. There's a lawyer, and there to talk about the legalities of this. And the spirit of the group, and I think Tom, who was leading? Tom.
Yeah, I lead that group, yeah.
Tom, I think Tom will be better. I was there for that meeting, and Tom, you remember that day?
It's been about half of our discussion, the contract
Yes.
discussion is
But
this topic.
can you speak on the non-compete discussion? That can tell my perception. I was listening carefully, and I thought they wanted to be very inclusive and not being, first, it cannot be, there's risk of saying, we cannot have a contract that will prohibit somebody from working the rest of the state. So
Right,
there are
yeah.
legalities, you know, but that's what you're asking is,
Right.
what does that mean? But Tom, you want to speak about the spirit of that discussion so far?
Yeah, we're not fully at like the final point of like, here's what we have hammered out, but if I had to summarize it, after a few hours of conversation, I mean, where we started is Plattsburgh has a non-compete clause, Social Island has a non-compete clause, we do not have one here. And it was a very big principle of the doctors here when we organized the group not to have it, so we don't have one. But the discussion really centers around that there are some vital service lines at some of the other hospitals that we have to have. The big example that always comes up is that the group that does in vitro fertilization picked up and left, and that's a private group up in Burlington. That's a vital service line for the residents of the hospital, and it's now gone out of, you know, the UVM network. So we came to recognize that there is a need for this in some of the areas to have a do not compete clause to bring physicians in, setting up a service line in some individual states into the project. So I had a meeting over the phone with the lawyer, who's the contract lawyer, about this back and forth of what would be the acceptable line. And there's this whole discussion that we don't want, when you sign a contract, 99% of the people who sign a contract will never ever want to leave, you know, and set up practice in the same community. I mean, the goal is to have a contract that attracts people, have an organization that keeps people happy. So the legal language in the contract basically says that we would like to have some due process if there's a non-compete clause. So why would it that how could I get out of this, basically, is the way to describe it. If it's a vital service line, like in vitro fertilization for the hospital, you're probably going to be told, actually I can tell you, you're told no. If you're a surgeon that comes to Central Vermont and you want to become private, you continue to operate here, we would probably say yes here, because we have a shortage of surgeons and we want to maintain that access for our patients. So we had to really come up with something that allowed flexibility on the individual level. The problem is that it goes back to governance, which is we don't know who's going to make that decision in the end. Is it someone centrally, or is it someone at the actual hospital, you know, deciding that, for example, at Central Vermont Medical Center, that a surgeon could stay working here for a project?
See, so the contracts are not gonna be, I mean, you mentioned contracts are going to be uniform. And now you're kind of getting into, well, uniform, but your specialty is gonna be another clause, depending on specialty, maybe a separate clause.
No, it's the same spirit, and if someone challenged it, there would be there would be a way that process would work out if a person did like sign a contract and then decide to leave and stay local.
But I know that in other communities, it's a mileage, okay? It's
Yes.
so many miles.
Yes.
So that's really easily spelled out. So I know
Well,
that.
it is, you know, we realize that. And that came into a big argument, which is the distance of non-compete over in Plattsburgh is much farther than Fletcher Allen's is, and we, of course, don't have that. The lawyer from Plattsburgh was arguing for 100 miles, which we said in Vermont, that kicks you out of the state of Vermont.
I mean, it's happened in Cincinnati, I know, you go from academics to private, it's not so much here, but academics to private practice, and people were having to like go away for a year and ring the city, you know, outside of a ring, and I know it can be quite contentious.
And bringing maybe some of my experience at Mayo, Mayo was considering the non-compete, we did not have a contract, but there was a non-compete clause that we would agree to, but it was not enforceable. It was one of the things that was not enforceable. The spirit of the discussion that Tom was leading was a lot more, what can we do for not pissing people off and making it welcoming to them and not making it antagonistic. That was the spirit of that discussion from the beginning to the end. You know, to the people that were craft, and you know, we're 6 months from the end, and nothing has been decided, and nothing is set in stone. But the spirit was more, how can we make this an appealing place, welcoming place, And if those people elected to leave, they should have a chance to and practice the state. It's a free world. There are business imperatives though. Just like you're gonna want your practice to be protected, if your partners were leaving, you would, and you're the one staying behind, you will have those concerns too, so that there is a balance. Okay.
It's just that when, if you try to grow, as you try to attract positions to come here too, then non-compete can become an issue.
Yeah.
Because people are gonna be, because you're taking a chance when you come to a new practice.
Absolutely.
And, you just say, oh, I'm gonna move my family here, and
There is
it
that.
may not work out.
And it's not the only thing the issue, it's not the only issue that will be in the balance, but it's a big one. But I think that one of the things, we have a non-compete clause that has been moved. It's 50, but I see contract, because I sign all of them, that sometime the chair is pushing for some cases where that person says, I do not want a non-compete clause for that person. And I think that in the spirit of what you just said, we think it's not very practical. So I saw contract with no non-compete clause, there's less of those, one that are 30 miles, one that are 50 miles, none above 50 miles.
And we waived, for the cardiologist in Plattsburgh who joined the group, we waived the non-compete. Because it was not, it came up as an issue and it was not enforceable anyway. They had an established practice there. We can't then tell them they have a non-compete if they wanted to go back into private practice. So that's what, and this is, they're gonna have to battle, and I think the issues you bring up are the issues.
The thing that really comes up in our conversations a lot is that we don't want to have it where like there's this contract, because there's lots of special deals buried in. And so, that as much as we could have uniform treatment in all positions, that's really was the goal of our group, because if it's all special exceptions, then the contract's invalid. Because and then it breeds this feeling that, well, he's getting a better deal than I am. And I think that's our perception of Fletcher Allen right now, is everybody thinks somebody else has a better deal than they have. It's part of the thing that drives people away from each other rather than binds them as a group.
And you would be surprised, or not surprised to think that people of Fletcher Allen think exactly the same.
Inside the building.
Yes, exactly.
So Tom, obviously transparency is a fundamental value in what you're working towards.
Right.
And that must be a challenge, because there's transparency, and then there's the details behind the transparency that you have to keep a light on.
Right.
And that's a big challenge.
Right. And that's the whole thing, is that could basically just wipe out all of your work. And, that it's been a big driving force here at this hospital, where we have transparency in the contract. That somebody could go and look at, like, okay, how are they paid? And they work this hard, and this is what they get for their specialty. That's something that's, it's out there, and there's no special deals.
At least I think people our new compensation plan in Burlington has been very clear that we were trying to drive toward more standardization, more transparency, and people are seeing that now and are expecting more of this. But it will take a while to remove this impression, and maybe part of this reality that there are still onesies and twosies, and sometimes it will be necessary. There will be exception, I imagine. I'll wait to see what the group will decide.
The other one is this is way down the line, is technical areas. For example, here we rewrote our contract and asked everyone to re-sign it, so everybody was on level playing field. And the issue that has come up is at other hospitals, there's legacy contracts, where somebody has a contract and signed this agreement, but then 2 years later the contract changed. So do we, at the end, decide as a group it's better that we all start on level playing field?
Can you talk about compensation between academic and community practices? I know you're going to use bench, there's a difference. I don't know what the difference is, but there's a difference. So how are you going to deal with that?
They aren't giving you you want an insider.
I do. I'd like to hear it.
I'll give you a general sense of the discussion, and I'll tell you that Jeremiah appeared on on the video screen larger than life. So it's like, back away from the camera. So here's the sense of the discussion. So, what's the appropriate benchmark?
Right.
Okay, and I think the group in general has recognized that for community physicians, the appropriate benchmark is the MGMA community scale. And then they've done some number crunching about, in general, where does CVMC fall on that scale? And in general, where does Plattsburgh fall on that scale? Knowing that those dollars are currently in the system. So then let's just say for the sake of argument, it's one. They're 100% of the median. If you take it at the very highest level. And then the question then became, and just let's, for the sake of argument, in Burlington, putting people on that same scale is something less than 0.8. Just, again, I am in fact making up numbers. Does that 0.2 difference recognize the fact, let's just use Plattsburgh for example, that it's more difficult to recruit a physician in Plattsburgh, and the kind of work that's being done by the physicians in Plattsburgh is different than the work that's being done in Burlington. Therefore, we have to recognize that there's a geographic and work difference of a surgeon in Plattsburgh and a surgeon in Burlington. And therefore, we will accept that we will still have a transparent benchmark. So everybody will know what the benchmark is, MGMA. And you'll be put on a MGMA baseline scale. There are actually when they looked at the data, there were very few outliers. And I think to what Claude was trying to say earlier was, so how, if people are outliers, either below the scale or above the scale, how do you bring people towards the benchmark? And that's where they are in those conversations.
And the benchmarks are based on our views.
So on in the end,
The work you do.
yeah, so the MGMA is, on the community scale is median productivity, median RVU production. But what they're looking at is a much smaller version, less complicated version of the UVM-MG compensation scale, where they look at capacity-based physicians and non-capacity-based physicians and assign a different, so capacity-based, non-capacity-based, so primary care docs would have more of their dollars today based on some productivity measure, and capacity-based physicians, those who have to work a shift no matter who comes in, would have less of a percent of their salary based on our view. Everybody would have a percent of their salary based on quality metrics, et cetera. And that's where the discussion sort of left the last time, to be picked up, if that makes some sense. With reasonable consensus that it was headed in the right direction, details to be determined.
And you can imagine there'll be more subtleties developing over time. If you only have one pediatric surgeon in a major hospital, you need to look at this differently than, you need more than one. You don't have enough work for two, you need more than one. So there will be some productivity situation that will be considered capacity, because you need at least two of that sort, and three of this kind. So there will be more discussion. Yes, sir.
I wanted to go back to Tom's discussion, because it seems to me that we're going to work out some deal on non-compete. It's really more on the issue for me is from the governance standpoint, you said we're not in the governance part, of who would then determine the waiver process going forward. Let's say we have a generalized contract that has a non-compete. It would be more important who determines which contract is waived, and how would that process go forward? It seems to me that's as important as the specific contract you guys come up with. You guys had discussions about how that, you said you wanted it to be fair and open,
Well, I mean, there's parts where as these committees come together towards one final proposal, then that discussion has to start to occur between them. At this point, that's a governance issue. And whether that would happen as some sort of central level or out in the individual hospitals.
So just from a process point of view, what we anticipated would have happened last week and the snowstorm didn't happen, is that these issues would have gotten on the table with everybody in the audience. So the various groups, these various overlaps would have gotten heard and back to governance to deal with. We're either gonna have to catalog these issues and have governance, but
Governance, when it's governance, sometimes it's gonna be hiring, and the intention is redistribute the overlap or the change of focus. You know, if that group decide that it's not our business anymore to take care of that question, it's gonna have to be placed in another group and taken care of.
if the academic work group says that if you're teaching a medical student here in Berlin, it should be recognized the same way teaching a medical student in Burlington is, and then let's just say that there's compensation for that, should a community compensation plan recognize that piece of work as it might in Burlington? So, I mean, that's another potential overlap.
Yeah. So I've got one question around the endpoint particularly for patient care and access. Do you think that the co-leaders in that group know what their endpoint is for that? Because when you described what they're going through right now, that they've defined the guiding principles of what good patient care is all about, and with patient at the center, you started talking about at some point somebody has to discuss where the distribution of physicians is. So how far will that work group go? Will they go to the specifics of specific disciplines and that workforce will be concentrated or not? Is that not their charge?
So what we've asked them to do is to work with a consultant who's done this before and could help us look at our market and how would you rationally position services in the market. Okay, that's one issue. Because I don't think you can answer that last question about where your workforce is or isn't until you kind of decide where the work is.
Yeah.
And the reality is you have to do, everybody's watching, right? Everybody in this room is going to watch and say, is this a big sucking sound to Burlington, right? I mean, that's, okay, if you're not, that's what they're worried about at CVPH. At the same time, the people in Burlington are worried, is this going to be a great big explosion out of Burlington, right? So you need somebody who's done this before and can take a look. And I would imagine this is going to be reasonably contentious discussion, but a good discussion. And I have no understanding of how it's going to turn out. I don't. So I don't know about Wilder and Diana. Mm-hmm. I do know that the specific thing we have charged them with is whatever model they come up with in the principles of how you would distribute services around the region is to take a service line and push it through that model and see what it looks like. So we can actually have a practical example and say, does this make any sense? Mm-hmm. And you could, whether it's, oncology, orthopedic, whatever.
By the end of the spring. Right?
By the end of the
Manpower reports, I don't even know if there are really any good models. So,
well, we've cataloged, so we know, it's not necessarily a manpower report, but we know in our network, all the employed docs, their ages, their specialty, and actually not besides employed docs, associate providers, all of our billing providers, we know their specialty, whether they're boarded, their age, and then we have some intelligence about non-employed physicians in our network. So we independent.
certain specialties in certain regions, based on population, or whether that's really a legitimate marker, or whether it's, like you said, capacity.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a complicated thing, because you have to have enough people to do the service, but you may have overcapacity.
But if you don't attempt to do the work, you end up in this
Yeah.
circle of
Right.
everybody's hiring too many of
Right.
somebody.
Yeah.
Or what we face now, I want another orthopod at
Right.
Berlin. I'm just making that up. Is that appropriate?
When you finish that, are you gonna release that information?
I hope so. I don't
Mhm.
see why
Yes,
any of this.
none of this,
But I mean, not just to your internal group, but to the whole method.
Yeah.
The reason that I'm being somewhat protective of the discussions that are going on is that they're still going on, and I don't want anybody to say this is the definitive answer, because they're like the non-compete, they're still talking about it, so.
So does that mean that as they go through the workforce, if the model shows that Judy has too many pediatricians and OBGYNs, that she has to play musical chairs and kick two out? Or how does it trickle down in the governance, the application and enforcement of this?
Well, let's
utilitarian model?
assume that we got it right. Let's assume that everybody
You
agrees.
get it right, there's no discussion.
No,
Let's
no,
assume
no,
you get
no,
it
no,
wrong.
no,
That's
no.
when there's
No,
no question.
No, let's assume that we got it right and there are too many
Yeah.
OBGYNs,
Okay.
okay?
Yes, right.
So I don't wanna shy away from your request.
or Burlington has too many out.
Right.
So I think we've had this discussion in the context of Berlin. What if we decide that more general surgery needs to happen here, and Burlington has too many general surgeons? I think the approach is, and, I'll let Claude answer, because it's really his concern, not mine, but I think the approach is you say to your workforce, listen, there is work to do in Berlin. Over time, pick a time. You're not gonna tomorrow make this happen. But over the next 3 years, we need to transition the work to Berlin. Or you need to follow the work, or unfortunately, we're gonna reduce your, I don't know what the or is, you can come up with the or. But I think that's, the folks are going to some extent have to follow where the work is, if we get that workplace
Found that,
over time.
we're not gonna tell you because we don't know, but you know already that it's either attrition or take advantage of the network or find innovative way to use the people and their talents, and there might be more flexibility within an institution like Burlington. I see it as people are, for example, getting more closer to being very senior in their practice. What happened? There's less of this, more of that. And that's a place that offers flexibility. Here, there will be need, and I think there will be movement, and hopefully we will take advantage of that great network. So I say there's those three things I'm not thinking of. There will be other possibilities that will come up. And hopefully the scenario that you put on the table first, does that mean Judy will have to kick out somebody? I hope not. I certainly would like not to kick anybody out, because that's a very bad publicity, right, for us. And why would we be mean? At the Mayo Clinic, it says on the, everybody knows if there's not enough job for 5 thoracic surgeons, gonna have to come up with something, because the clinic won't keep us 5 working full-time doing nothing else. And so far it has worked for 100 years. For thoracic, neurology, so there has been to be a way. So that's how I would answer respectfully. I'm not pessimistic.
And we do the one good thing that we're blessed, at least our current affiliated hospitals are blessed by geography.
Yeah, it's true.
To give you an answer, the other precise thing, the Mayo Clinic has lost 125 physicians just this year because of the change in benefit. They all retired. Those people are retiring, happy to retire. I was at the ceremony last month. Very happy, smiling. I look forward to the video. It was a great thing. They lost 100 people and they will hire only 25. Because things are changing. And they have not fired anybody. But they waited for the time. It was the right time. And they are redirecting some of the energy. That's one way, and that system allows, there's flexibility. It's a big medical center. So scale this to here. I think that there are options, there will be options. And I think that's why we think the hiring and retention group, the Tom group will and the other group, the patient access, I think we'll have those options for us, hopefully. Or it will come obvious.
Just to clarify a point along the lines of the distribution of the healthcare providers, it sounds like you mentioned that you are going to consider the independent practitioners when you're looking at that distribution, whether it's general surgery or orthopedics in that area. It's not so much just with the being a medical group, but it's okay, we have whatever the number might be, of pediatricians, some would be independent of orthopedic surgeons or general surgeons. It's not so much as intrinsic to our group. You know, we want to have 4 surgeons here, but there are already 2 there, so you know, we're going to refer, obviously, that intrinsic referral, non-compete clause with our, you know, referring to people within the UVM medical group, it easily kind of push those independent people out, so.
So there's been a piece of work that was done by somebody who works for Dr. Deschamps, Abby Truder, and it's just a model. Okay, so a model is only as good as the assumptions you put into it. But she's made a model with some projections on future demand based on population growth, which isn't very much, but also with the aging of the population. And looking at how many specialists we currently have, and how many primary care docs, and how many today, and how many primary care docs would we need in 2017, 2018, 2020, based on the model. But that includes all the current people who are practicing, whether independent or. Because again, unless we decide that we're gonna come over the hill and make some major attempt to either hire everybody and or compete, you know, just really, really compete, then we're gonna have to overhire for a little while to try to win that market share. So we're nowhere near that, so.
Now,
We looked at this, I
just want to clarify.
I looked at
I didn't hear
business
you
plan,
say
I
that.
was at the, just sitting watching the business planning subcommittee of the medical group board this morning as it reviewed business plans, and every one of those business plans had on the bottom of it the supply and demand needs. And again, it's just one more piece of information.
I'm sure in Plattsburgh, it's a high percentage of independent practitioners.
Yeah, it's about 15% of their medical.
Right, yeah, I know.
And so, and we have, we are listening, because the same question came last week during Plattsburgh Friday morning, and the gentleman asked the exact same question, slightly different way. And I think that we have to consider it, even with the number, yes, but if you look at all the integration process in the country, none forget that part. There is a relationship will be there, we have to define it, and that will be together. But we cannot look at ourselves as especially in CVPH is 50% are independent physician, 50. We cannot say, okay, go away bad dream. That's not like that. So those people have to be involved, included, and we learned that. I don't think we would like to learn that the hard way.
And our consultant, Chris Collins, has brought this to. So I think, however we ultimately end up with a governance structure, we're going to need to understand where the independent docs are kept. For a bunch of reasons, I would like to bring the independent docs as close to our structure as legally possible, because I think I'd like to convince people that we have a better mousetrap. That being said, we got to build what that structure looks like before we can attach all those other points.
Yes, remember that. I don't want to make it more difficult for people interested in joining. I want to make it easy. And I won't forget. Yes. What's your
So,
first name?
Andy.
Andy.
So do you foresee in 3 years, let's say, that there's gonna be one medical group? And so, in other words, so that if everybody signs kind of a standard contract, that your paycheck will come from a single entity. So it won't matter whether you're Fletcher Allen, or University of Vermont, or, CDMC, it's all one medical group.
To be
I'm
determined.
gonna let him.
Yeah, there may be a community group, and there may be an academic group that refers to a common parent.
But
Yeah.
you were-
We don't-
I call it the Uber board,
Well, we
but
might
that
have-
may be one.
We might have a different answer, and I know you were not asking Julie, but I'd like to let her finish.
I'm done.
This is just a personal thing, because
No,
we
but
were thinking about
listen,
joining.
we heard
the
that question, we heard it differently, you know, we heard, are you taking us over? With my salary decrease, we heard all those questions in town hall or in weird conference like this. But we also heard, are we gonna be one medical group? There's a difference between the vision and what we will be, and practically, I do not think there will be one medical group in 3 years. We might be in 10 years, we might be 3 medical groups tightly together. There might be legal reason why we cannot be, or financial reason for this, the health of the system, that we cannot be one medical group. So there will be lots of consideration that I don't even understand or know. But do I really think that in 3 years, that one medical group will be it? I don't know. Would that be a good thing for harmonization, the working together easily, recruitment? It might be, but it might not be possible. So,
And if I were to speculate, I would say within 5 years, because I want to go out, because this is what I love to do. Within 5 years, there'll be one, so you'll get paid by one entity.
Right.
But the way that entity is, the way that you're controlled as a physician or provider, looks very differently around the system than because I get paid from this entity. So your compensation plan there might be 2 or 3 compensation plans. There might be 2 or 3 different ways that a request for a hire comes up through the organization. I mean, these are the difficult things that people are gonna ultimately, but I always like to think simply first. And from a who sends out the paycheck point of view, who cares? But how I govern on a day-to-day basis, I care a lot. Who's gonna tell me where to head my car? Who's gonna,
and he's very particular about his car.
very, not real. So, I mean, those are the things, and I see people getting a little lost about the paycheck thing, but not, and then I see people passionate about the governance thing, which is where I think the money is.
I'm looking at Mark. To your question, Kim, go Kim first.
Yeah, in light of the decision to not include associate providers in the contracts, how did that come into play with your model that you developed as far as the supply and demand and predictions of workforce?
Well, okay, so I'm not sure, I want to make sure I answer your question.
Yeah.
So
The premise is a little bit, go ahead.
So Abby, I think when Abby looked at the current market, she was able to look at all the people who are contributing, all the providers contributing to taking care of the current market. And that's sort of the static point picture. And then she grew the market based on demand. Don't ask me too much about her model, but she grew it based on demand, and then said, do we need more X's and Y's? And the problem with the model, I'll tell you right away, is it assumes that the care model today is the care model in 2020. And, at least I believe that the care model is going to look totally different in 2020 than it looks like today. So that's the problem with the model. But it's just one point. It just helps you when you're trying to look at, do I need to, so some are obvious, right? Some, do we need more primary care doctors in our system? You know, in Burlington, we'll take all the adult primary care doctors and nurse practitioners we can get tomorrow. We know that I don't need a model to tell me that I need that, but when we're talking about another orthopedic surgeon, the model is quite helpful in understanding. So that, it's just a model.
Does that include?
And I'm not sure whether that was your, okay, because I know you started with contract and then you asked about model.
Well, the two things go hand in hand. You've made a decision, there's been a decision to not include associate providers into formal, work contracts, okay? So if we're not.
I should give a quick background on that, but we ran into a problem in that nurse practitioners in Fletcher Allen and the nurse practitioners in PAs in Plattsburgh are unionized. We can't work on a contract to include them because it will be seen as union busting. We're coming up with a counter proposal to their current agreement. So we had to step aside, setting up a contract which we thought was a model that perhaps for future discussions would be a good model that we've done here at this hospital to do it in parallel. So it's not that we ditched the associate provider. That's not the spirit of what happened. We had to pursue that.
And it's a for now, that's how I understood it. This isn't for now, but not forever. And it might be the job for the Office of Integration, who is likely to take over that. Not everything stops in July. That process will continue under the auspice of the Office of Integration.
Right, I mean, so we can move the model, which is not union busting, which is if the nurse practitioners in Fletcher Allen wanted to join and leave their union, that was something they could decide if they thought this was an attractive process, but we cannot go out and glue them. So we can't have it as part of the discussion now after that.
So maybe I should clarify that. That being said, other than myself, there's no other associate providers on any of these task forces. That's a fact. And I've brought this up multiple times. But what I want to know, regardless of that, is this data that you're collecting and looking at supply and demand, is it now including, because I've been told, I sit on the access committee, that we will be given some of this data and we'll be able to try to put together that model you talked about that we would trial. And is this data looking at all providers, all comers, PAs, MPs out there?
So I would hope that we wouldn't hire a high-level consultant who wouldn't look at all the providers in the network. So we haven't hired the consultant yet. You know, that whoever it is will come back to you'll have a chance to vet and have your concerns allayed with the consultant. So I don't understand how we could look at our workforce and not look at our your associate
That would be a
provider.
lousy consultant.
Yeah, sure.
But the other
Didn't
thing I
see
would
that
add
as
is
the
that,
reality we live in, and that's our
What I
care.
gotta add to that is that I think the consultant may overlook that because they're afraid of the union. And like, it's part of that issue of you can't discuss it.
But I don't think the
You can't argue
consultant-
it.
No, but if they're willing to look at independent practitioners as part of the model. It's workforce. It's workforce. It's workforce.
It's workforce, yeah.
It's like an independent practitioner.
and that is,
And you
that,
make a separate compensation engagement with them. And hopefully you pull in into quality and academic and everything else that they can engage in productively for the system.
But where is the contract coming from for these social providers? They're here.
Presently, we handle that here. In the future, we would probably have to set up, if there was one physician contract, we have to set up something parallel here, because we cannot do it at the hospital. We can do it in Burlington for PAs, but not for nurse practitioners.
And the PAs and CRNAs in Burlington who are not in the new current deals.
and I hope, you know, I admire and I understand what you're saying, and you've been very persistent, and I hope that you'll make them suffer like you make me suffer right now. By telling them exactly that, because I'd like them, you know, you are there for a reason, a good reason. You're right, we only have one person, and we, you know, we should have known better, and if an apology is needed, I'm not shy. What I'd like is you to be forceful, honest, like you are here, like you've been at other places I've seen you. Because I'm not bad. I want to, he's trying to save me every other day. Yeah, that's right, we're not done yet. But I really believe what you said is true, is correct, and you mean it. Let them have it too. You know, if they don't get that data over there, they will hear from us. And we do believe it's workforce, like you were saying.
It has to be.
It has to be there. So I do not believe they will be afraid of the union. I want this to happen, so keep doing what you're doing. But let them have it too, not only me. Okay, Howard.
You would, because of your persistence, I spent an hour with Ann yesterday, we had a great conversation, and the subsequent follow-up for that is that Ann and Sue Murdoch are going to go and talk to the entire academic work group, or at least leaders of the academic work group, because to your point, there's a lot of work being done that should inform that work group.
Are we taking what? Phil, are we doing okay?
No, you keep,
We're good.
we've got questions,
Yes,
let's
sir.
answer them.
What's your first name?
Chris,
Chris.
the fact that you're committed to independent governance of the different facilities that have different histories and different needs is encouraging. How do you see that working through the fact that the work group is trying to have a one contract fits everybody, yet, Judy will be managing different people differently than they will be at Plattsburgh or here? Because I see, one effort to have everything be the same, have a contract where, all of these positions are done by the same contract, but they're going to be governed kind of with different rules and different locations. Isn't there going to be a bit of a tension in there?
As your premise, I heard, I don't know if your premise is correct, because you're presuming that this is all decided and the governments will be equal and different in all three places. I did not say that. Did you say that? So you implied that the three governments, what we want is recognize the uniqueness of the three major medical centers, and anybody else that will join us. Hopefully we'll recognize those differences. But we never said that. I don't think the group have decided that they will have three separate governments. They're looking at models right now, and Howard has mentioned 2 out of 4. But they have 6, 7 months to change their mind, turn around, come back, leave again, go up, go down, and get in panic, and then take a deep breath. So I would not think that we have committed to the premise that you have said. Now, this being said, I certainly count on the fact that we are different. Those governments will make progress, and then the way to manage compensation and contracting will get in sync when the groups will meet and compare those cards. So that's how I would answer how you started, and
A
hopefully.
principle we had in ours was that so often you're hired that you don't know who you're responsible to. So we really wanted that spelled out in the contract. That who are you responsible to? What is this governance structure? That you should never be hired is really vague. And so this came from all the hospitals. People really wanted that much more clearly spelled out when you were hired. You really started with a clear idea of what that governance is. Now, granted, some of this has to be determined, but we do want people to really know the structure, so it's not vague.
So we started understanding that it's always going to be a tension, right, between local and central control. We struggle with it in federalism versus what happens at the state level in our country, same struggle. That, Dr. Brumstead is fond of now. He has this, what do you call that, fulcrum-y thing that has on one end autonomy and on one end value, and he plays with, if you had central control, you might be able to get more value out of, you tell everybody what to do, when to show up, but there's some balance, right? So that's, governance is, I think, trying to look at the balance point. And the other thing is, and I can't answer, so I'm going to ask a question that I can't answer today. we need, John, I keep picking on orthopedic surgeons, we need an orthopedic surgeon in Plattsburgh. Everybody agrees, the model agrees, everybody agrees, we need an orthopedic surgeon in Plattsburgh. Who hires them? And who do they report? And who's responsible for their quality? And, you know, just go down, actually paying for them, I think will be relatively easy. It's all those other things that people tend to worry about. And I think that's the question that governance is going to have to and recognizes that.
One of the aspects of this process that I've been very, it seems to be very evident to me, is everyone's working in a silo. So Tom's working in a silo, I'm on the finance work group, we're working compensation, going down one path. Academic is going down another path, patient access is another path. Hiring and retention, as I said with Tom. But the vision of what this network is going to look like doesn't seem to be apparent to me, and tonight in hearing the discussion, it isn't apparent. I know you've said we're going to have the all-member meeting, we should have had it last week, but you know, how does that go towards where it seems to me that there should be, what is this network going to look like, and what is it, the guiding principles, not just in consultant speak, but in day-to-day actions. And then how is it going to be governed? And then how is it going to be manpowered? And how are we going to deliver the care? And it just doesn't seem to be that process here. It seems to be, I'm working hard with the finance group, and you said we made that process. And your presentations were in silos. You had one listing for finance and one listing for academic and one listing. You need to, I think, have a better, we all want to have a better idea, what is it going to look like? And then how is it going to be directed and governed? Is what you just said going to be true or not? That Judy is going to, that all of us here really like to work with Judy? And then if that's the case, because that's an attribute here, you're an attribute here, and we want all of our attributes that's here to remain here and to build on that. And so you have to get a sense of what that.
Be in a network, right?
Well, yes.
Did you say that?
Sure, because I think there's two things with the network. One, we can offer you a lot,
Absolutely.
and you can offer us a lot. And how does that work together? But no one really knows what it's going to look like yet.
Right. Okay, can I ask you a question?
told you to shut up before.
Aren't you a little bit in a rush? Impatient to see the end result? I am. Please don't forget that the first time other people had a shot at this before, and from what I could tell, and most of us, was not working. And when we run that project to many groups, there was one that was saying, you're going way too fast, you should do one group at a time, and they were talking about years of process. Years, not months. And in my mind, I wanted this to be done in 4 months. 3, hopefully. People are saying, are you crazy? So what I see is that you're thinking like me, you'd like to know what it looks like, but don't forget where we started. Most of the people sitting in the groups are starting to think differently. Now, you're way ahead of a lot of people. A lot of the people that I see are thinking, whoa, this is going way too fast. And I'd like to know a little bit about what we're going to do in my group before they're much more concerned about their group than what the bill picture looks like. Probably are more of a system thinker, and I think you're like me, you're in a rush and you'd like this to be done. But where I see what you're hoping will happen is when the groups start meeting together, and it might not be done in 7 months, in July. But I'm hoping that this will become more obvious to all of us, including you and me. That would be my answer. I have no doubt that it will look better as we meet and we tackle things and we talk like a system. We just started to sit together, and you'd like to know how it looks like. I think it's too quick.
There's no guiding principle to each of the individual groups. And that's what we hear as we discuss amongst ourselves.
But there were
So then
like-
Tom is working one direction, we're working in another direction. There's no guiding principle heading towards something.
Maybe you don't remember the white paper, or maybe you do, and you might choose not to remember it, but the white paper, I would turn you back to that as the closer thing to a guiding principle for all of us. It is lofty, it is high level, but I think it helps me anyway grounded. I don't read it every night, but I do look back, especially when I'm a little bit challenged with, are we doing okay? But it does ground me back. So that would be, and I say that respectfully, I know what you're talking about, and we forget sometimes, because you are asked to do very difficult things in each group. And looking at the details, it's very sensitive what you're doing. I'll leave it a little time, but I would say, and I'm done, excuse me, we have plenty of time. So I would say go back to the white paper too, but I have a lot of faith that when the five groups get together, that there will be more what's happening within the group. Mark wants to
So here, yeah, so,
I just want to raise, I'm hearing something different than Marilyn's question. And I think, look at this kind of exercise. If a month from now, you gave every one of the groups two governance models, and you said, go to work, see how you can fit your tasks into two different governance models, and experience the problems, experience the barriers, experience where it doesn't work.
Run the model.
Run the model, but deal with two of them. And that way everyone kind of gets a little exercise out of it, well before June or July. While the governance committee takes the feedback and maybe retools. and
right,
gets
so the
corrected.
slides that would have been presented last Wednesday would have had both models on. So, I mean, I'm not,
I think that's what I'm hearing from Mayo.
So
The groups are feeling like, we don't know how to apply this to anything, and we just want to practice applying it.
But it's starting with the others.
so a couple.
Next time,
Man, you might not have been here for this, and I wasn't here for it, so it's good we both weren't here for it, so I'll just tell you what I heard. So I heard, and I'll channel my friend Dr. Tahari, who came here and told you all the way it was going to be. And that was based on his principles and based on what he thought. Told you the way it was going to be.
And that went over like a lead.
That didn't go really well. That was the go away.
that's the guy at Yale.
Yale, right. He went to Yale. So
My French version.
we did, so what we did do is come up with principles for each work group. And we did write an aspirational white paper. It was an aspirational. But we needed to leave it flexible enough. Do I have the way I would like it to do it?
Yeah, you
That's
let
not-
that slip out sometimes.
Yeah, but that's not, but I also say it is the way, it's my opinion. And it's not informed by all of your opinions. It's not even informed by what the folks in Burlington would want or the folks in Concord. It's how I think, and I tend to think relatively simplistically. We have to let this process play out a little bit, going back to the principles of each work group, and then going back to the white paper. If we've missed, if we should take a shot at it, is, our project management committee we haven't had as many robust meetings as we would have liked, and unfortunately, last week.
Well, and I don't see anything wrong with, who's on governance here? Who's on governance in this room? Nobody.
Peter's
Nobody here.
I don't see-
Peter Dale
Well, what Mark you
and
just
Matt
said, I don't see anything wrong with
Greenberg,
Yeah.
and then
what
Cheyenne.
you just said. In order to answer that question or to get us closer to that question, just like you're running, the model of patient care and access over a service line. There's nothing wrong in running the two governance as an exercise, and I think it's a great idea.
And the basis of the next governance meeting, which is why they didn't want the consultant there, is to say, what do we like and what do we don't like about our current model, and which one or which pieces of each one might work better. So that's, so to be fair to them, they wanna have that conversation.
You getting tired of it? Any other
Getting
question?
tired of- No.
No,
I could ask
like-
one more if you don't mind my monopolizing.
No, you're-
Obviously, this seems somewhat complicated, and a ways back, it seemed like I heard there were rumors that the university was gonna consume some other hospitals or centers, or, was in a kind of growing phase of merger acquisition. Is that kind of on a freeze while all this gets worked out, or is it still trying to grab any hospital in the state of Kent?
Oh, in the state?
Sorry. It's university.
Consuming.
I mean, I will,
No, consuming. Can I see my reaction? The word consume is a little negative. It looks like there's smoke, and then you swallow, and then you digest, and there's nothing else after that. I think you'll be more.
yeah, so I can tell you what's going on. That's public knowledge.
Like
which
that,
is
none of it
untold.
is consuming.
No, nothing is. So the closest next hospital into the mix is Alice Hyde, which is in Malone, New York. They probably won't, so they're not a critical access hospital today. They probably won't be a critical access hospital as they come in based on sort of looking at their financials and looking at their market. But it's relatively small. Robust primary care in Malone, New York, most of which supplied by independent physicians in Malone, New York. Some of our best refers to Burlington. Some discussions, so going sort of west, which I think will be the furthest westerly discussions with Camp Potsdam St. Lawrence Health System. That's the hospital in Potsdam, New York, plus a small critical access sort of facility in Governor, New York. Early discussion, well-run. I think the hospital's about the same size as this hospital. Well-run hospital. Potsdam has 18,000 students during the academic year, just to give you some sense of that community. Tomorrow morning, there's a board meeting at Ticonderoga Hospital, Air Lakes Health, which will probably ultimately in January, and this is speculation, but informed speculation, vote themselves out of existence and become part of Elizabethtown Hospital, with the community of Ticonderoga having robust primary care and an emergency room and some specialty services. That's probably what that's going to look like.
I think Ken Potsdam's gonna come in shortly after.
But very big, I mean, literally this morning.
Copley's the other one.
Yeah, so then some discussions with the folks at Copley. Please.
I look like I'm as important as you guys. It started with our CEO being invited. There was a number of contact points, but our CEO was invited to go to the Copley board. So Mel and Patashnik, the CEO there, invited John, and John thought he was going to meet a small group, and the whole board was there. And they wanted to hear what he had in mind as a CEO of the entire network. He talked, and then we were re-invited, Howard and me, with John, to talk about some of this, sharing the process. So he was talking basically to a group of independent providers, because none of us, very few work, a lot have a relationship with Burlington, and they have their concern. The orthopedic surgeon have their concern, the primary care physician have their concern. They are losing 2 general surgeons, apparently, to a retirement. So they have a huge concern about that type of coverage. So that's Copley, and that was what happened. And then they have a CON for renewing their operating room, for innovating their operating room, and that is generating some, you could say, controversy. Then there is a much smaller discussion. Quarter, also the board invited John to talk. John went there and talked, and we have several relationship of physicians working there, but they don't have an affiliation with us. Am I still correct? And say But Jim Daly is his name, is gonna retire, announce a retirement at the end of 15. And so this is probably placing a hold or a freeze on anything until that CEO position is determined. So those are the two hospitals that I've heard John talk, and that's where it is at.
And the only thing that I would add to just to round out the entire mix of discussions is that there's a large primary care practice called Hudson Health Network. Headwaters. Okay. Yeah, there's 3 H's, I never get them right. And there are about 160 providers, primary care in the Adirondacks, stretching from Glens Falls to Champlain, New York. Almost every community that's an exit on the Northway, they have an FQHC clinic in, so they're all FQHCs, which means that our relationship with them has to be different. They could actually own us, but we can't own them because of their status. And we've had some discussions about how close we could come together. Very interesting group. Again, in the northern half of the state, very good referrers to our network. They provide the primary care in Ticonderoga, New York, and would like to expand the primary care footprint in the New York market, including in Plattsburgh, which, if we don't have better discussions with them, could potentially be looked at as predatory. So those conversations are underway. At the same time, they would like to start a family medicine residence, see what the folks at Glens Falls Hospital. We're trying to stand up a family medicine residency in Plattsburgh. So they're good people. They are very smart and good people, and so we're having conversations. It will be an interesting discussion to have. So that's pretty much all the discussion.
And so to answer that, the premise to your question is, looking at our CEO and the discussion around the table at the network, of which Judy is there every time, there's no freeze right now. And certainly this process is not a reason for a freeze.
And I will tell you that, so John and Spencer Knapp and Todd Keating, the CFO of the system, Spencer, the legal counsel of the system, Diana, the planner of the system, were in Potsdam, New York. One of the very first issues was, what's going to happen with my position? I'm told that John answered it quite well. I'm not sure what the answer was.
Just one.
It'll come back.
Yes,
So, when Summer Elmer applied, whatnot,
he does.
how are you going to measure this entire process as being a success?
I think it will be ongoing, meaning it won't be in September that we'll know, but this will be monitored by the Office of Integration, and Howard is the Officer of Integration for the entire network. And the charter, I think that would be my answer, but I'd like to know if I would think I know what's going on. But I think I was not done. The charter, I'm talking about the charter of the Office of Integration, will be determined by one of the work group. The patient care and access, one of the charge is to decide what the office, so I think that would have been my answer. How off was I? Repeat that?
I remember what I was.
Do you want to say it
Yeah.
before you forget it again?
Yes.
But then don't forget to answer.
I won't, I will.
So I think a real advantage of being a part of the network sooner rather than later is we're currently developing the rules. We're currently in the process of creating a structure that all these other hospitals are gonna have to live within. So when Kent Potsdam comes in and Alice Hyde comes in and maybe even when Copley comes in, the rules will have been written by this group and the group in Plattsburgh and Burlington. So we're not gonna stop the train's moving forward. And we're in the process now of creating what the future is going to look like, not just for us, but probably many other hospitals in the region. I think that's a real big advantage of being in first.
And
The charter sign, we're signing the Constitution.
So sorry about that, I think we're going to good.
I've been there.
How are we
So-
gonna monitor this?
So I think several things are gonna happen. Some groups, so I'm gonna speculate, right, because that's what I do, then I get myself in trouble. So I think finance will get us pretty close to a compensation plan that people could get comfortable with. And then it'll just be a matter of what's the period of time in which we implement it, how do we deal with people who are currently outliers, et cetera. Because again, we want to keep, the whole idea is we want to keep our workforce, we don't want to piss anybody off. But if somebody is making 2 times X, then it's 2 times X, and they'll need to be transitioned over. Patient care and access, we'll come up with some principles, we'll force one service line through that principle to see whether it actually works, but we're gonna have to do some more, and we're gonna have to put it to a reality. And we're gonna have to put, to your point, well, we will put measures in place. Governance, whatever the structure that stood up, there's needs to be, so I could see, so let's say, just speculate, 5 years from now, one box where all the physicians are employed and the providers that can be employed by that box are employed by that box. We may need a couple of steps to get there. I don't know what that looks like, but we may, and so that'll have to be monitored with an implementation plan that I don't expect will have the implementation plan. So I think we'll have to look at where everybody ends up. I want everybody to end up with principles that we can use going forward. And then if we need additional committees to come up with the operational plans, or whether we've built enough trust that a couple of people can go off and come up with, I don't know, but I think there'll be another chunk of work that we'll have to follow on this work.
Did you like my answer, or you wanted a really long-winded answer like this?
You can't tell
I mean,
time.
I thought I said exactly that in 8 words instead of 2,500 words. What do you think?
Yeah, I think, kind of to Galen's point, and maybe we're being premature, but there's kind of a lacking global vision. And that's, I think, the piece that's hard to kind of wrap our heads around. Maybe we're just premature, we need to let it play out a little longer. You'll have more to share the next time you're here. But that piece of what does the UVM Health Network stand for? What is our big vision on, actually during the summer, but 5, 10, 20 years down?
Did you read the white paper? And I don't want you to be on the spot. If you did not, it would help you. It would help, because that was meant for that. And if it's not the right way to express the vision, then we're missing something. I think we might have to, do you think
We'll resend the white paper. We've already made a note
But
of
I
that,
don't want to
so-
be paternalistic. You have a point. If you're
No.
not seeing
And
what
I can-
I'm seeing, I think that don't we have to find a way to?
Yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
and I can
That's
speak
right.
to, and I can speak to some of what I think we're trying to do, very high level. I think one of the things we're trying to do is when a patient walks into any one of our facilities, say that the quality of care, no matter where you walk in, is of the same level. And if we can't deliver that element of care because that facility doesn't do it, that would seamlessly transfer you to a place that can deliver that care. Okay. I mean, I can
And we
spout,
want, yeah, I think, I'm
And I
going to
believe in that.
Yes, we want coordinated care. We want your patient to have access to clinical trials. We want new model of care everywhere where it makes sense. I want medical students where it makes sense, where they are welcome, where they will enrich the practice. And I want the provider, whatever type of provider they are, to be satisfied, and it's not we want, Judy, that's all she's talking about. She wants her provider, that's why you're saying what you're saying. She loved this place, she wants to protect the right thing about this place, but there are benefits that will be mutual or different, that will come on both directions. There was John before, and then Andy, and then this
John's
gentleman.
quick, it was, in comparing that there's
democratic, it's
Yeah.
just that if you see something that has all these nice pieces to it, then you keep trying to bring it down to, well, what does that mean, you know, for your particular area, or how do you see it, and you can't get it from there to there, and you keep wondering what it's gonna look like.
I think we'll come back with that. I think that there's a need. We have to listen to this, I think that, and to hear, I don't know, I don't have the answer right now, but I think that we have to to be responsive to this, and I'm not sure how we'll do it, but I think we'll find out.
Yeah, and I think, John, I think you're absolutely, I mean, I think in a nutshell, that's exactly right. We all want to know what it means for us. But some of that's got to get worked out in the process.
I also think if people do come to these meetings every month, you'll be hearing more and more about it, and you'll be able to speak your voice and actually have input into what people bring back to the market.
He's first, and then Andy, and then Mark.
I'm going to drill down even to a finer point, because it's the same basically John just said. So I'm going to dump on Plattsburgh because they're not here, but you said they're 50% independent. So when you have the access group and they're looking at what service line can be done where, and you say, well, you know, we don't really need to provide that service at Plattsburgh because they don't do enough cases. Well, maybe that should be done somewhere else. What happens to the provider there who's independent, who's doing that service or providing service? Does the hospital say, well, we're not supporting that service anymore, or is that a restraint of trade issue, or how does that work if it's something that they've been doing here for the last 10, 15 years? What do you, I mean, that may be
So,
something that's
so
worked out
here's
great,
a,
but I'm just saying here,
so let me give you,
practical point of view,
let me give you a real life example of that. They have a Da Vinci that needs to be replaced, we have a Da Vinci that needs to replace. And if you look at the numbers might not support 2 Da Vincis in our system. So we're going through an exercise to try, independent of this process, going through an exercise of what are the appropriate cases to be done on the Da Vinci based on what the current literature says. So we've asked some people in Burlington to do that in Burlington, and so we've asked some people in Plattsburgh to fairly go through that exercise in Plattsburgh, so it doesn't look like Burlington's dictating the process. And then we'll bring, you know, the business planning folks are going to bring that back and have a discussion. Is that restraint of trade? If Plattsburgh loses Da Vinci, will some of the people there be pissed off? Absolutely. So we better, if that's what happens, and by no means is that, we better understand what the rational arguments are. That, you know, when you look at the realistic number of cases, there's 10 cases. And for those cases, we'll privilege you in Burlington and give you time on the OR schedule to do this. I don't know that that's the answer. But those are the kinds of, I mean, and quite frankly, in a conversation that I've had with the urologists are in practice, I've had this conversation. We just have to fairly.
I mean, that's a very good practical example, but I mean, and that makes sense because it's big dollar spending, but some of the things are, you know, inventory stock, and sort of, I mean, the stuff that.
So inventory stuff. We had a cardiologist that's not employed by, it's employed by Plattsburgh, but not employed by us, was very angry about St. Jude's ICDs being taken away from his ability to use them. Well, you dug into them, and they really weren't taken away, but the idea was we need to try to figure out sole source contracting, and if St. Jude's wants to match the price that Medtronic's, more than happy to have St. Jude's. Because you don't, I mean, we're not interested in pissing off
what
the
I'm getting at, you
providers.
just say, hey, we're not gonna do that, we're not gonna buy that equipment for this hospital anymore, all because we're not gonna do that procedure, and then the guy who's the cardiologist doing that says, well, if I don't have a St. Jude's or Medtronic or anything, I can't do that procedure here anymore. What happens to my trade, my livelihood, when, you know, I can't, as an individual or an independent, I can't go buy that equipment.
I hear you, and knowing what I know about these sites, absent a couple of sort of odd things that are done, I can't even imagine in reality coming to that point. Go ahead.
We have a affiliation agreement, and in the affiliation agreement, there's protections about the elimination of services here. so in order to eliminate the service, it would require a supermajority vote at the board level. And, you know, it might take.
And that's not gonna be affected by the governance issue
No.
process.
No, this is the governance issues that you guys are talking about, is physician governance. It's still, this organization is still governed by a board of trustees, and that definitive agreement, the affiliation agreement, is still intact and will stay intact. So, and keep in mind, you know, we provide a lot of bread and butter type services here. I'm not interested in eliminating any of the services that we provide to our community. In fact, I think what you might see is the opposite of that. You might see where our services are enhanced.
which is what we believe. But a fair look at, since it's easy to pick on Plattsburgh.
Well, as a, you understand. as a
I don't
current-
believe, so, you know, the big one, so the cardiac surgical program was closed. I think a fair read by anybody who looked at that, whether you looked at it dollar and cents or you looked at it from a quality standpoint, was the right decision for that community. Was it a painful decision? And are they still, you know, is there still a fair amount of emotion about that decision in the community? Yes. But we've increased the volume of interventional cardiac caths of New York State patients at Plattsburgh. It's the right thing to do, right thing to do for the patients, good providers, high quality. And that's the way we're.
That cardiac surgery program, they made the call. It was not John Bromstead saying, we close it tomorrow. Andy, and then this gentleman there.
So one of the things, and I'm sure you probably can't answer this question, but when you start talking about service lines, specialty, subspecialty, when you start talking about chairman of departments, academic chairman. So one of the, and maybe this is some of the unease, is where does the chairman of the department of a specialty fit into into the kind of quality governance evaluation of people in that same specialty who are not academic? And again, some people have actually, we all make a decision as we get through training, academic, non-academic. Part of the reason a lot of people are not academic is because they didn't like the chairman of the department. You don't know that, right? You're right. You're right. So where does that?
I'll give you an example. Well, I happen to be the all-department chair, or what we call healthcare service leader, answered to me as the president, and all medical director of service line answered to me. We only have two right now and one real service line. David Schneider is the head of the service line, he's the chair of cardiology, he's not chair of the Department of Medicine, and he's leading people in CVPH that do not want to be academic. You're crazy about him.
No, I know, so that's
So that's
great
one
when you have a
example.
really good guy.
Yes.
Maybe sometimes you have a really bad guy.
Yeah, but that's true
Or
for.
woman, or whatever.
Okay, that's not your case right now, but that's true for a really bad CEO, a really bad president, a really bad chair of anesthesia.
Well,
May not be the way the government's model works.
No, that's what I'm just saying. I don't think the answer's there yet, but as you
You want us to be aware of that.
yes, that's all.
We
Where does it
can't,
fit
no
in?
matter who's gonna do the job,
Yeah,
whether here it's Judy or somebody in Burlington, somebody in Plattsburgh, if we can't design the principle and understanding that we need to make this work, and we use the wrong human beings in positions of power, it's gonna fail.
well, it's just a relationship, that's all. It's not just the
But
person.
we,
It will be difficult.
and none of this is lost on us, and and I asked the question before, right, to sort of provoke that, which is, if we understand that there's an orthopedic surgeon needed in Plattsburgh, whatever the governance model is, who hires them?
Right.
And who do they work for?
Right, that's right.
So
And where's the
I asked-
chairman
So
fit
it's
in?
not lost, it is not
Yeah.
lost.
I just, I mean, I don't know,
Well,
there's
it's
not
a
an
very
answer, it's just
valid
a
question.
question.
And where I differ a little bit with Howard is that, you know, if we say we hired the wrong person, we're gonna fail, of course. And have we failed in the past? Absolutely. And do we have people that are not that smooth and poor leaders? Yes, and we'd like to have better people in some position. We're working on it. But we will make mistakes, just like, you know, you're telling your children, if you have children, you're gonna have to take risk and make mistake, and we'll work through it.
And my
But
guess
I
is
think
we
we should be.
Yeah, my
just
guess is
different.
the
How do I
relationship
get through with your meeting at that point?
between an academic chairman and their department versus an academic chairman and people in the community, the relationship is gonna be different.
Yes, and I'm looking at your eyes when you said that. Yeah, and a challenge for some.
Yeah,
And for some less, but you're right.
It
And
really
I have-
depends on the chair, and whether the chair has a system
Yes.
viewpoint
Exactly.
or a
Mhm.
Burlington
Yes,
centric.
and we have some of both, to be
Yes.
honest, we have some of
And
both.
some
And
who
I
have
know why
moved,
it can be scary.
And some,
and some
and
who
you
have
moved on,
and
so.
some who've moved on, and some who've moved
Right.
their previous position to more network focused.
That's right.
We have this gentleman. First
One of
name,
the big drawing cards when we first affiliated was information system integration. And I think about some of the bumps and the problems we're having going forward with that. And then I think about 5 new hospitals and probably 5 different information systems. How is that being, it was such a big part of our discussions in the beginning. Is it still a big part of your discussions with the other hospitals? Are we all going to be on Epic?
eventually, yes.
Yeah, it's back on the front burner again, so we're taking a real strong look at
And we will.
converting all of our systems to Epic. And with the idea being that everybody in the system will ultimately be on Epic. Yeah, so it's.
And Judy has promised to pay for all of it.
You are.
Well, the company's responsible to keep the
But they did, exactly.
But the discussion in Potsdam this morning, you know, they have Meditech and they need to make a decision about their record as well. So it's at the forefront of it. But it has, as Judy said, it's now back at the forefront.
What's the timeline? Right here.
Justin?
I think it's too soon to say, to be honest. I think there's still been pricing information, a lot is still up in the air exactly about what it looks like, what the timeline looks like. The timelines that I've seen thus far have to do typically with converting the ambulatory practices over to Epic first, and then the inpatient environment will be converted 3-4 times down the road. And in the middle of that is going to be a very large change at the medical center in their revenue cycle management software, because currently they cannot use they use GE for their revenue
For the
cycle
billing.
management, but they're going to move that to an Epic shop. So, I mean, when you're talking about the full scope of the project, it's massive. So I think the timeline is really, I wouldn't be comfortable saying what the timeline is at this stage, or when it would start.
And it may be a COS.
That's funny because I was at the retreat last week and Justin is your name?
Yeah.
Justin exactly said a great summary of what we heard. Actually. That's exactly what we heard.
It took all morning.
Took all morning. I love the short answer. You did great. But it was exactly what we heard last week. On this positive note.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
The next meeting is January 28th. We'll send out messages.
Yes.